Chair.
That's great. Thank you, Gareth. All good to go. Okay. I'll start by reading the following statement. May I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded by the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. If you wish to speak, can you please use the remote raise hand function? When invited to address by me, please could you ensure that your microphone and camera is on to ensure that you can be seen and heard when actively participating. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. So on that, welcome all committee and non-committee members, members of the cabinet, officers, and anyone else watching along at home. So before we get stuck into the agenda, Gareth's got something to mention.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just want to remind members of the committee that there are two forms available if they want to, for example, request a topic for scrutiny to consider. There's a request for consideration form, and there's also the call-in form to call in a cabinet decision. So those avenues are open to members of the committee. If they want any further advice, Chair, just reach out to me and I will provide the advice and guidance as per necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Gareth. Much appreciated. So moving on to item 1, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies? Councillor Payne.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Wendy Gilligan.
Thanks very much. Gareth?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I think we've got Councillor Gilligan here, so we'll grab those apologies. Thank you. It's just the two very councillor members, Chair, Phoebe Bond and Rhian Davis. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks then, Gareth. I can't see any other hands up, so we'll move on to agenda item 2 to agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of November. If there are any comments on that, or if anyone would like to second those.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. That's great. Moving on to agenda item 3, to receive declarations of interests and the nature of such interests. We imagine there'll be a few of those from committee members at school governors. So Councillor Avey at first in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm a governor at Oakfield and Colca Primary Schools. A member of my family works at Pencoitre High School, and I'm also a member of the SACRE committee.
Thanks very much, Julie. Councillor Gyfarfod.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a member of the SACRE committee. As a personal interest, can still speak and vote.
Thank you very much. Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a governor of Palmerston Primary School, so it's personal, not prejudicial, and I will stay in the meeting. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Martin Price.
Hi, I'm a governor at St Richard Gwyn Catholic High School and chair of the Vale Governors Association.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Claire Werrett.
Hi, Claire, you're on screen, but you may not have activated your camera or microphone. Yeah, Claire, we'll give you a ring. So, Chair, if you can continue, we'll get in touch with Claire any second.
No problem at all. Councillor Lynch-Wilson.
I'm a governor of St Athan Primary and a governor of Lantwick Major Comprehensive, and I'm also a member of the Vale School Governor Association.
Thanks very much, Julie. Councillor Hodges.
Hi, I'm an LEA governor for Yscol St Barrack in Barry. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Kathy Riddick. We'll come back to Kathy. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a governor, LEA governor at St Athan Primary School, personal non-prejudicial interest, and I will be speaking.
Thank you. Geraint Scott.
Hello, yeah, I'm a governor of Yscol Pennegarth.
Thank you. Councillor Asbury.
Hi, I'm an LA governor at Genus Powys Primary School. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Kathy. Oh, we can't hear you.
Try again. Can you hear me now?
We can, yeah.
That working? Sorry.
That's great.
I'm Chair of Governors of Whitmore and Pencoitry and Barry Sixth Form, and also Chair of the SACRE.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gilligan.
Hi, just to
Oh. We had you for a second, Wendy. It's Claire.
I think you can see me now, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, just
Yeah.
to let you know that as Head of Education for the Diocese of Llandaff, some of the schools concerned do fall under my remit. So, it's, you know, it's just for you to be aware of that. I don't think it's a conflict of interest in any way, but I just wanted to make the committee aware.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. And I'm a member of the SACRE committee as well. And I don't think there are any other people wishing to declare an interest. So on that note, we'll go on to agenda item 4, which is a standing item for agendas now to confirm voting rights for co-opted members. And Gareth will give us those at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So there are members at present with voting rights on the committee meeting tonight. Chair, we've got Kathy Riddick, Dr. Martin Price, and Claire Werrett have joined the meeting, Chair. So they can vote on educational matters brought up in the committee. We should also have Lucy. She's not joined us now, Chair. So we'll try and reach out to Lucy to see whether she's having any technical issues, Chair. But thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Gareth. Okay, agenda item 5 then, into the substantive agenda. Reference from Cabinet is to Vale of Glamorgan Council school balances. We got a letter through on Friday as well, which will be of keen interest to councillors, I'm sure. So Liz Jones will introduce this. Over to you, Liz.
Noswaith dda, Chair, thank you. With your permission, if I start off, and then I will be ably assisted by Samantha Clements of Audit Wales and Tom Bowring, Director of Corporate Resources, and Trevor Baker, Head of Service. So the purpose really of the report is to advise members of the findings of the Auditor General for Wales' review of school deficit balances. Back in the summer months, Audit Wales started its review of school balances and was considering the effectiveness of the Council's arrangements to support and challenge its schools to recover from their budget deficit positions. And in a minute, I will ask Samantha Clements, who was the audit lead, to take us through the report itself, because that's in your bundle and that is Appendix A. So the review was undertaken as part of the Auditor General's duties. And as a local authority, to satisfy the Auditor General, we had to be able to demonstrate that our accounts were prepared according to regulations, that proper accounting practices had been followed, and that the local authority had adequate arrangements for securing the efficiency and effectiveness in managing public money. The review findings concluded that a quarter of the schools in deficit at that time had not submitted recovery plans. It also found that the council was taking a range of actions to support and challenge schools to recover from their deficit positions, but that had yet to achieve much headway in actually reducing the overspends. And then finally, it found that there were shortcomings in the council's reporting of the significant risk, and that this is limiting the effectiveness of monitoring and challenging in public committees. Now, following the work of Audit Wales, there were 3 recommendations. And again, you'll find these in the body of the report in Appendix A. So the focus in essence has to be for the council to improve its oversight of the impact of our actions to aid assessment of value for money, and to look at strengthening the support and challenge from the learning of other councils across Wales. In order to respond to the Audit Wales recommendations, we have created an action plan, and there are actions aligned to the 3 recommendations, and this is where later in the presentation I shall be asking Tom and Trevor to take you through and explain how we are going about addressing these shortcomings. So we're bringing this to you today so that you have, as part of the recommendations, to ensure that you as a committee have better oversight of what we are doing. And as part of that, to assure you that we are making progress against the regulatory improvement areas, and that this will be monitored through the Strategic Insight Board. And Governance and Audit Committee will also be informed of progress against our regulatory development priority areas. Cabinet obviously will have final oversight. On top of that, our progress will also be monitored by Audit Wales as part of the Council's annual audit work programme. So if that's the background to the report, with your permission, Chair, is it okay if I hand over now to Sam Clements, who was the audit lead, please?
Absolutely, please do, Liz.
Thank you, Sam. Can you take the floor, please?
Yeah, Chair, I'm just hoping Samantha has been having audio problems, and we have reached out to her, Chair, and we're just hoping she can come on screen. And so, Samantha, are you there? I know you've left and rejoined, but Samantha, if you can come on screen, you can present the findings of Audit Wales. Samantha, press the request to speak button icon towards the bottom of the screen. I don't think she's. Okay, sorry about this, Chair. We also have some technical issues with Samantha. I think Tom will be able to give a brief overview, but obviously not as in-depth as Samantha, and we will try and reach...
Happy for Tom and others to kind of fill in. And
we will continue contacting Samantha. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. And I'll do my best to give you a summary. So, as Liz mentioned, this piece of work was done back in 2025. Audit Wales were looking at whether the council has got arrangements in place to support and challenge schools to recover from their budget deficit positions. And as Liz mentioned, Appendix A to your report this evening, committee, provides the comprehensive report that Audit Wales have provided to us. They've set out the context of that review as being important, that noting that school balances have been reducing sharply across Wales, but in particular in the Vale of Glamorgan, the percentage of our schools in deficit at the 31st of March 2024 was 42%, and that increased to over half of schools by March 2025. The report notes that the council faces significant financial pressures across other services, and therefore the balance of use of reserves is obviously really important when we're considering the findings of the position that schools are in. The report also reflects the work that Estin undertook back in 2024, when school balances and their deteriorating position was also noted. The report provides 3 main summary findings: that many schools' recovery plans are not robust, and that poses a risk to both individual schools and the council's financial sustainability. The report also concluded that the council is taking a range of actions to support and challenge our schools to recover from their deficits, but that is not yet reducing overspends. And finally, that shortcomings in the Council's reporting of this significant risk is limiting the effectiveness of monitoring and challenging public committees such as yourselves this evening. Audit Wales have made a series of recommendations. The first is around to enabling greater oversight of the impact of our actions. The Council should strengthen corporate oversight and also set realistic milestones and expectations for schools to improve their position. The second area of recommendation, Chair, is to enable robust support and challenge, and the Council should require all schools who are in deficit to submit a robust recovery plan, clarify the criteria that we will use as part of statutory powers, assess and set out the budget monitoring and risk management reports, the significance of school deficits. And finally, the third area of recommendation is to identify any additional actions that could be taken to address the deficits. We should review alternative approaches that are adopted by other councils. So that's a summary of the report, members. And obviously, if Sam is able to join the meeting later on, she may well be able to go into a little bit more detail. But with your permission, Chair, I was going to turn now to Appendix B to your report. And Trevor and I will take you through this part of the report, which is the management response form. As members of committee will be aware, when Audit Wales produce a report and set recommendations for the council, we are required to then formally report our management response to them. We're bringing it to your committee this evening for consideration by members of this committee. As Liz mentioned as well, this report will be referred to Governance and Audit Committee. That committee will also have the opportunity to comment on the recommendations and also the management response. So in terms of the first area of recommendation in the management response, this is the one associated with greater oversight that the council should have and strengthening our corporate arrangements. Since September of last year, we've been meeting on a fortnightly basis, the leader and the chief executive meeting with myself, the Section 151 officer, and also the Director of Learning and Skills and the Head of Strategy, Resources and Community Learning. And we've been looking in detail at the position on school balances, bringing in expertise where we've needed it, for example, through legal advice, supported by the Education Finance team to really understand the position of school deficits across the Vale. Back in December, I updated the Governance and Audit Committee as part of the Corporate Risk Register. Members will note in this report that Audit Wales make specific reference to risk management. Within the Corporate Risk Register of the Council, we've been tracking school deficits as part of the financial resources risk for the last couple of years. However, at the December meeting, I did make the committee aware that we would be bringing a new corporate risk to be proposed to go into that corporate risk register, specifically associated with school balances. And in your bundle this evening, members, Appendix C to your report is that proposed corporate risk for inclusion in the register. You'll note from that corporate risk that inherently, the risk is very high. With the controls that are in place, and they're detailed throughout this report, that reduces the level of risk to high. We're also taking a series of other measures as well as part of this. Obviously, as I mentioned, we would be taking that corporate risk register to the Governance and Audit Committee. And as members will know from the update that you received at the end of last week, we have invited 7 schools to meet with ourselves over the course of the next couple of weeks to discuss their recovery plans and the latest position. And I know Trevor and Liz will be able to give you some more detail on that. The second part of the first recommendation is around setting realistic milestones and targets to improve the monitoring and evaluation of the impact of the work that we're undertaking. You'll note within the report, both Appendix B and C, that we've got a series of actions that are being taken in order to understand the level of impact that they are having, and that's being tracked tracked through those fortnightly meetings. We've also established a school deficit management and intervention plan. That's setting out the criteria within which we will be looking at the performance of individual recovery plans. I wonder if at this point, Chair, I can hand over to Trevor to take us through the second and third areas of recommendation and our response to those.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Evening, folks. So some of this information that's contained in the report you've already had an update on the last meeting we had, I think it was the last one on the 10th of November. So section 2 of the recommendations talks about some of the robust support and challenge that the council is required to do around schools submitting their recovery plans, the criteria, and how it's being monitored. Tom mentioned 7 schools who've been invited in. That number started at 10 back in September. Following a second round of updating recovery plans, that 10 reduced down to 7. And those recovery plans were reviewed, and there was still some work to do on them. So we asked them for a third round of reviews of recovery plans. Those recovery plans for the remaining 7 schools have been submitted by the end of last week. So we've just had those through. So we're currently going through the process of looking at some of the detail in those plans, and then we're anticipating to meet with those schools so that they can talk us through some of the challenges and opportunities that have been presented through those. At a cursory glance, looking at some of the detail, it's very clear the amount of work that our school has been putting into these. The 3-year deficit has reduced by 55% since the first round of recovery plans were sent through, and the in-year deficits have reduced by 20%. That's year 1, where it's hardest to make the changes. So there is some significant work that's happening and starting to see some of the results on those. The report goes on to talk around some of the assessment criteria that's used when looking at the use of statutory powers. That includes when intervention is needed to be taken in schools, and the work with those schools. So we've been looking at what the individual criteria will be going forward. So at the moment, the schools have been identified for informal and formal notices. Predominantly has been on the size of the deficits they have and the amount that they've been able to reduce those by in comparison to other schools. Can I just double check? Sorry, you're still able to see me because my video's frozen.
Yeah, we can hear and see each other.
Right, there we go. So I'm talking to a frozen version myself. So going forward, it's how does that play out in future years? Because obviously there are a significant portion of schools in the Vale of Glamorgan that are facing those challenges. And you know, the current information that we have to date is those challenges are going to continue going forward. One of the references I made in the last meeting we had was the WLGA State of Education in Wales. So again, I'll plug that if folks haven't had a chance to see or read that. I think that's really useful information to give you some local context of it. But we've got an acute problem that I went through on the 10th of November in the Vale. It also goes on to talk about some of the work that you folks are doing, and I think part of that is on the agenda today. So the work with members around the 12-week task and finish groups. Obviously, there's the one that's been looking at ALN, and school budgets is coming into play on that. And that's going to be an important perspective for folks to be able to contribute to. And then on recommendation 3, it talks about working with other local authorities who are in, you know, who might be able to provide some advice and guidance. So that work has been ongoing for a number of months, working with neighbouring authorities and authorities across Wales, looking at the state of education funding and some of the interventions and support mechanisms to be put in place. Many local authorities are finding themselves in a similar position that we were a number of years ago. Unfortunately, we're leading the pack in that sense, but those have been really useful in terms of some benchmark figures to support our schools, looking at other schools with similar sizes, with similar demographics, and the effectiveness of some of the other interventions that have been put in place. That's also led to some specific support mechanisms which have gone into schools. So in terms of some of the different support mechanisms that have gone in, one of those has been some consultancy to support school leaders and governing bodies in looking at where some of the opportunities for change might be and for transformation, or looking at some of the technical aspects around staffing, around things like timetabling and efficiencies around there. That's proved really useful. That so far has identified somewhere in the region of about 700,000 worth of savings that schools have been able to identify. Some of those are related to how staff are being used. Others are related, like I said, to things around logistics of schools, things like timetabling, that kind of stuff. We've also been working with other local authorities in making sure we're much better equipped to share some of the information that we have. So being able to share and look at their live data and vice versa, so that as we plan and implement some of these changes and support mechanisms, and as schools start to embed some of the changes they've identified, we can watch in real time and learn across the piece. It also goes on, and again, we've spoken about this at the previous scrutiny committee around some of the more systemic changes that we're trying to do at local authority level to support schools. So there's details in there around the School Improvement Partnership Program that we've been working with our schools. This is looking at a mechanism to support capacity within schools and some of the change programs that will ultimately, in addition to also improving teaching and learning for our kids and some of their outcomes, deliver some savings for them. That board has now been established, and we've had our inaugural meeting with the head teachers who represent that. That's been a really positive approach in terms of the work that schools are doing horizontally and vertically around some of their priorities with things like teaching, learning, and reading, which again will have an impact not just on budgets, but of course for the benefit of our learners and staff at the end of the day. That's been bolstered with some of the work commissioned with the Education Endowment Foundation, which we've spoken about previously as well, which is looking at research and evidence-based practice for high-quality teaching and learning. So again, the scale of transformation that schools are having to look at is Herculean. It's enormous. There are levels of transformation that we've had to do for some years around how we deliver our services, but this is a different kettle of fish for our school. So that kind of support is starting to yield some of the benefits around that. In addition to that, we've spoken about previously some of the other mechanisms we put in place. Some of those are to, again, create capacity in schools and reduce some of the bureaucracy or technical specialisms that they might not be equipped to look at. So previously we've spoken around things like procurement. We have 53 schools, 53 separate organizations doing things 53 separate ways. The nature of a delegated budget means they've got every right and responsibility to do that. But where it's possible for us to look at some economies of scale and take some of that burden off of them, we have done. That's yielded roughly 100,000 in savings in September. It's about 150,000 since June of last year, and that's just by changing some contracts. Some of those contracts are have led to more insourcing, so other services within the Vale. There's been two benefits from that. One, we always talk about the need for transformation within the local authority in all of our services, and this is a mechanism or a leverage to support that transformation to make sure that what we're delivering for our schools is the best it possibly can be. So that's been really positive, as well as getting schools involved and creating some more time for them with some of the aspects of legal, for example, or endpoints with their contracts. So we've done some of that with waste, for example. We've got some more coming in the digital sphere, which has been really, really useful. We've also established some networks with our school business managers. So again, these are an untapped resource who have a wealth of information and experience in our schools with some of the logistics around that. So giving them some protected time and some additional support to be able to do some of that work so that school leaders can focus on some of the other challenges and opportunities that they need to look at. We've also done, in response to some of our schools, a review of our funding formula. So quite often we get asked the question of, is the funding formula that we have fair? Again, we've talked about this previously in terms of the various funding formula we have from UK government to Welsh government to local authority and then down to schools. Our immediate influence is the formula that we use in delegating the funding that we have to schools, which represents about 30% of the council's budget. That review was completed recently, looking at the mainstream schools funding formula. Again, it doesn't create any money, but what it does do is make sure that it's fair and transparent in what we do have available. It's an ongoing piece of work. It was redone completely in 2016, and the most recent version was completed a couple of months ago. Those reviews aren't done in isolation by officers in the council. Those are done with governors and with school leaders as a subgroup of the schools budget forum. We're now going through the process of looking at our special schools funding formula as well. So the things that we have control over, we're looking at doing and making sure that those are as precise as possible. Through some of that work with the budget forum, through some of the work and the feedback we've had from some of the consultancy in schools as well, there's opportunities for us as a local authority to look at some of the things that we need to do to support schools better, just as schools have been able to identify some of the opportunities that they need to look at. So it works both ways in that sense. I think some of the other detail in terms of some of the other support mechanisms we've put in place, we've spoken about previously, but one of those, and it's in the management response form, is the mechanism by which we keep you folks updated in terms of how this progresses. So the next conversation that we have at Scrutiny will be able to identify some of the detail around those savings I mentioned. So again, you know, a 3-year projection in terms of deficits reducing by 55% across 10 schools is significant. It's by no means easy for the schools, but it does show that there is some capacity for change. And it's going to be really important that we have those conversations with schools in terms of what the impacts of some of those savings are going to be, what sort of mitigations we need to look at, and how we can support sustainability in the longer term. But that's it in a nutshell from me.
Diolch, Trevor. To bring it to a close then, really, Cabinet is being asked to note the current position regarding school deficits and also to consider the content of the Audit Wales report findings and the Council's response to that alongside the corporate risk on schools deficits. And similarly, we are asking that the Startwell Committee, as well as Governance and Audit Committee, has oversight of what we're doing, and whether there are any comments that both committees would like to make so that we can refer them back to Cabinet for consideration and endorsement. So thank you, Chair. If I hand back over to you, please.
Thanks very much for that, Liz, and for everyone presenting. That was thorough. I'm sure committee members appreciate that thoroughness. So over to members of the committee now. Councillor Payne first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all. I just want to say, you know, there are, you know, extreme cost pressures on all local authorities in Wales, and if we're looking at particularly with the ALN budget, we're kind of a victim of our own success in providing such high quality provision. So we've recently been doing the task and finish group with regarding additional learning needs, and you know, there's been a phenomenal spend on and a phenomenal culture change in putting our ALN provision within schools. So that is more cost effective, and that is really successful. We did a visit to the PMed base at St Cyrus last week, and I think the provision is second to none. We heard from the young people in the base, the staff and the support staff. So I just want to say it's not for lack of will, really. But my thing is around management structures and stuff. I've read through, and there's a lot of information, and there's a phenomenal amount of work being done by officers over the last 2 years. So is there a review of management structures in school included in this? And I don't know who'd be best to answer that. But we do have high quality provision. You know, our Estin reports are really good. We have been working with schools over the past year to look at how they can reduce and manage their budgets better. You know, we did look at buddying up with schools that do manage their budgets well. So I wondered what's been the outcome of that? You know, has that helped? And, you know, maybe do we need to look at management structures too? Thank you, Chair.
Do you want me to jump in there really quickly?
Yeah, please do, Trevor.
Yeah, we've had a few questions along those lines around things like management structures, and there's a couple of important points I think just to recognise. One of those is no two schools that we have are the same. So even schools with the same number of pupils, even within the same demographic areas, will have different challenges. So there isn't a one size fits all. A lot of the guidance that we have and guidance from Welsh Government, there's some information there around things like suggested ratios and those sorts of things. But where it becomes difficult is the implementation of that within the local context of individual schools. So some of the work we're doing with other local authorities can help provide a baseline of that. But I think it's too blunt a tool to say everyone has to fall into that exact category, because that doesn't take into account the individual challenges within the schools. The other thing we need to look at is each local school has the curriculum, the delivery of their own curriculum, and some of those different delivery models can have greater or lesser impact with greater or fewer staff and greater or fewer resources. So it's that kind of stuff that we need to look at. Helen talked about the challenges that we have around ALN. We absolutely do. You've heard us speak around that many times at this committee around the exponential growth we've had in the number and complexity of needs of our kids. And you've heard me say it before, at the end of the day, society has changed, the needs of our kids have changed, expectations have changed. And when you pile that in with all of the other changes schools are looking at doing, it is incredible and incredibly challenging for them. But it is a motivator or a driver for looking at changes in practice. There are really good examples of practice in some schools which can be adopted elsewhere, for example, or different mechanisms of delivery. But a lot of the times they can't be looked at in isolation. So if you're asking a school to change part of its delivery to be more inclusive or to accommodate different things, we need to look at, are the staff skilled for the nature of the needs of those kids? If not, what does that look like? There's needs time for that to be embedded in. The skills of those staff as well. Again, they might be delivering excellent teaching for a period of time, but as I said, society has changed and we need to look at that and how do we upskill our staff to be more inclusive? Because equally, we have to make sure that those kids with additional learning needs in the classroom have the same access to teachers and aren't removed from class unnecessarily or taken off site if they don't need to be, because we do know the best place for those kids where possible is in mainstream education. Equally, we need to be looking at what we can accommodate within our specialist provision. Again, through this committee, you've seen the growth with YYD. So within the Vale, all of our specialist provision is done via YYD. We have YYD Penarth, we have the Berry site, we have Dara Newydd, we have an engagement service. We have Lindera that's coming on stream this year, which will help with that. But the honest answer is no matter how much we build or how quickly we build it, it will get filled instantly. So that's only part of the solution. The other part is what are we doing in mainstream and how do we support it? And Helen mentioned some of the work at the PMed base. That kind of stuff makes a real difference, not just for the kids, but for the staff and for the council as a whole. Really, I'll leave it there.
That's great. Thank you for that, Trevor, and thank you, Helen, as well. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. I can't see myself on screen yet. It keeps locking up. I don't know if you can see me.
We can hear you. My screen's freezing as well, so I'm not sure about everyone else, but we can hear you, Steve.
I'll just go off and on a minute and just. No, okay. If you're happy for me to speak without being seen, Chair, I'll continue.
Please do, Steve.
Yeah. Okay, it's just a couple of things for clarity, really. This benchmarking with different local authorities. Which local authorities are we benchmarking with? And what tools are they being directed to? For example, are they using the Department of Education Insight tools or some other? Also, I'm a little concerned that there's nothing really in depth of the schools that are going to struggle, even with the help, to achieve anywhere near reducing their budgets. So some idea of what the plans for that as well would be nice as well.
Sorry, everyone's frozen, so I'm hoping you can hear me. So we're working with other local authorities, for example, Monmouth and Torvine. In terms of the type of benchmarking we're doing, a lot of it is in terms of when we're looking at the level of school deficits, the types of schools. So from a school organization perspective, for example, and what that means in terms of the formula. So we know some of the findings from that. We know that our schools are most efficient when they're one form or two form entry school. Beyond that, it becomes more challenging. So looking at the different ways that other local authorities have been accommodating for that. Also looking at, as I said, the efficacy of some of the changes or interventions that have been introduced elsewhere. So I think I gave the example previously of things like timetabling. So when you look at our secondary schools, there is a calculation there looking at the amount of teaching that can be done for spare periods and for teaching periods. And are there different or more scientific ways of looking at that, which can use the same numbers of staff or fewer staff or a greater number of children, for example, but delivering those in a different way. So that's been really, really useful. Also looking at some of the impacts of some of the other interventions that have been put in place, things like community focused schools, for example, where that's been really beneficial. Where we've been able to learn, as well as some of the data reporting mechanisms. So every local authority is different. All of our funding formulas are different. How we report information is different. I think we spoke previously around some of the changes Welsh Government is doing around how school funding formulas are calculated. Again, not that it creates any more money, but at least we'll be able to compare some of that information and compare apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. So we've been contributing to some of that work as well. And there might have been another question there, Stephen, but I'm afraid I can't remember what it was.
If I may, Chair, the other question was with reference to the schools that are going to really struggle to get anywhere close to reducing their budgets. Do we have a plan to help them out, or what is the plan for that?
Yeah, there is no easy answer. There is no one thing or series of things that I could suggest today that is going to make that problem go away completely. That's the challenge. And overall, in terms of education funding, we aren't unique in that position. There are lots of local authorities who are in similar positions. What I would say is, based on the conversations and information we had back in June versus the information we've had back from the third round of recovery plans, there is scope for what schools have been able to do. And I think there's a lot of good practice that's been identified. We've looked at it both from a mechanical point of view. So what we do at local authority level is a lot of the accountancy work. We don't expect our schools to be accountants, so we generate the plans for them. All of the spreadsheets, we can tell you where every pound and pence is spent over the next 5 years in a school. and we can share some of that information. But we've also put in additional support from a teaching and learning perspective, because it's really, really important that we don't look at this purely as a financial exercise, because at the end of those spreadsheets are our kids, and we need to make sure that we're able to deliver the provision there. That doesn't mean there aren't incredibly difficult decisions that schools are having to make and that they're going to have to change. But from a sustainability perspective, it gives us a direction of travel, I suppose. We've also got some really good examples of some of the more innovative practice that some of our schools have done. I can give you one example with wraparound provision, for example. So lots of our families need wraparound provision at the start and end of a school day. Lots of schools equally offer breakfast clubs or after-school activities. There are paid and unpaid services, and there are gaps. So in some instances, none of that provision exists in schools. So schools have been working together to identify pathways to deliver wraparound provision. It brings in some income to the school. It's usually cheaper than what parents can get elsewhere or for the other arrangements they're having to put in place, but it also provides that wraparound provision in an environment where kids are with their peers and to do some learning as well. So there's those sorts of initiatives that have happened. That's been replicated 2 or 3 times this year, and it forms part of the recovery plans for some of our schools, based off of the work that's been done in some schools over the previous few years. So there's some interesting opportunities there. There's also a big piece of work I've spoken about previously around things like agency. So the need for agency staff has gone up. And again, we need to look at sustainability, because some schools find themselves in a position where they have temporary contracts, and as part of their recovery plans, they haven't renewed temporary contracts, or they've more accurately let those temporary contracts expire. But if nothing else changes, there's still a need in those schools. So there's a greater reliance on agency, and we've seen that in recent years, a significant reliance on that. And that's increased somewhere in the region of about £5 million over the last 5 or 6 years, our reliance on agency. And again, that's really challenging, because it's really difficult when there are commercial interests off of the back of schools. So there's some really good work happening through the school improvement panel that we've talked about. And with some of the support that we've put in place centrally, looking at the different models of how support can be done on a cluster basis, for example, as opposed to reliant on agency works. And again, every cluster and every school is different, but we have every permutation of what a model might look like, and we've done the analysis around what's more effective and what isn't. We also have a number of schools talking about some of the specialist and sort of technical provision. So rather than having to buy in specialist services on a regular basis individually, those economies of scale. So there are some opportunities for things to change. I'm holding on to some of the quick wins we've been able to deliver around some of the school's infrastructure. But in terms of changes to practice and teaching and learning, that is a medium to longer term strategy that we're looking at with schools, and that's going to take time to deliver.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Councillor Asbury.
Hi. I have been around a few schools as part of my role here, and I have spoken to a number of head teachers who have been extremely concerned about the budgets and lack of funding as they see it. Do we know if this is replicated throughout Wales? Is this a Senedd problem, or is this possibly a Vale problem? And if you can't answer, Trevor, I understand that. So I'm just really making an observation, I suppose.
So there is an inherent problem for all local authorities in Wales around education funding. We've known that for many years, and we've talked about it for many years around the challenges in funding and the differences with that. There purely just isn't enough money in the system. It's as simple as that. That's across the board. Where we in the Vale are different is, and I spoke about this previously as well, is the variations that we have in some of the surpluses and deficits in our schools. So we have schools in similar areas with similar demographics, but a difference of $1 million or $2 million in terms of their deficits. So that is unique, and so that is a Vale problem that we're having to deal with, compounded by the overall challenges we have in education funding. And there's quite a lot of advocacy work that's been done through the WLGA, through ADU. Our head teachers do it as well. Our Vale Governors Association have been excellent as well in terms of raising those issues, those inherent issues around funding that we have, to try and make it a bit more equal, and so that folks understand the impacts of the decisions that schools are being forced to make at the moment. But equally, we have work to do, and it's reflected in the report in front of you around some of the differences within our own backyard with some of our schools. So that's the bit that we can control in the medium term that we're working to.
And just one more question as a possibility. Supply agencies, as far as I know, do charge the schools quite a bit of money for the supplies. Years and years ago, I know local authorities had their own group of supplies. Would that be cheaper for schools, or would the agencies charge the same price as possibly the LAs?
There's a couple of different models that we're looking at. So one is we have lots and lots and lots of different suppliers for agency within the Vale across schools. Each cluster has their favorited ones that they use. So there is some discussion to be had based on the economies of scale on that as a shorter term solution. We have some schools who have very, very low agency spend, but their staffing numbers are higher. So obviously they've got more slack in the system to accommodate when there is sickness or whatever the case may be. So the work is looking at, on an individual school basis, that's really expensive. But if you were to look at that across a number of schools, it could be a cluster, it could be a small group of schools in a local area, or it could be schools linked to some of the school improvement work that we're doing around vertical and horizontal collaboration. There's lots of different permutations, but that gives us the economies of scale whereby, one, you've got staff who are employed with the local authority, so we're looking after those individual staff, which is really important. Two, we've got staff who have real consistent connections with schools and they know the kids. Staff who will know the curriculum of schools and who would be able to participate in things like inset days and staff development activities, which gives a real benefit when they're in there doing that supply work. So that's the model that we're looking at doing at the moment. What that looks like in practice, we have some more work to do with schools, because again, how schools use their agency is different. And again, because that's school level, that's not where we have our expertise. So we're working with schools to get as much information that we can so that we can put some of that infrastructure and identify what some of those savings could be. But with that piece of work, savings is a big part of it, obviously, but for the reasons I just mentioned, there's a whole host of other reasons why we want to be looking at that as well, in terms of the provision that we're able to offer the kids.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Martin Price.
Hi, thanks for the presentations from everybody. But my concern, there's one point which I would like to point out in the cabinet paper. I think there's an error in section 1.10. I mean, Councillor Haynes asked what the council was allowed to do. Line 1.10 says the council cannot write off balances. The council is permitted to write off balances or part of balances if they wish to do so. There's no legal requirement, anything preventing them doing that in a legal sense. So I think that's probably not right in the paper in the first instance. But the main thing that I'm concerned about is what head teachers are telling me is that schools have legal obligations to provide a good standard of education, to work with the pupils with additional learning needs and looked after children and provide a safe environment. And what they're telling me is that there isn't enough money in the system to do that. You've talked about some schools which you think where there may be organizational ways in which they can do something about it. I think getting on for 3/4 of the schools in the Vale are in severe deficit. some of those are supposedly recoverable, but that suggests a systemic problem, not just the ones you singled out and are looking at, the 7 that you're calling in next week. And it worries me that the council's strategy is to pick on schools and to put huge pressure on schools, when actually what's happening is they just haven't got enough money to meet their legal requirements. And the pressure on schools, on governors, and but most specifically on the senior management of schools is immense. Trevor used the word Herculean in his presentation. I would agree with that. And I'm very concerned that we're going to end up with burnt out teachers, burnt out head teachers. And if you're looking at your systemic way of looking at individual schools and saying teachers have to teach more, then we're going to get even worse state over the next 2 or 3 years. I just find the strategy of putting all the pressure onto individual schools is not in the long term in the interests of education in the Vale.
Thanks, Martin. I think it would be useful for a comeback on that from an officer or member of the cabinet or anyone. Trevor.
Should I jump in there? It's really difficult. Martin is fantastic. I love Martin genuinely, and he does so much for us through the Governors Association. I disagree, though, when we say we're picking on individual schools. We are having really difficult conversations with schools who are significantly outliers in terms of where their deficits are. We have a majority of our schools who are in deficit. But when you look at averages of deficits, across other local authorities across Wales, the ones we're having discussions with are significantly in excess of that, where these deficits are set to increase by huge amounts over the next 5 years. And that does put the council at risk. So we have to have these really difficult conversations with them. These aren't conversations or a process that has come out of nowhere. This is working and having discussions with schools through the School Budget Forum, with all sorts of folks over a number of years. But we've reached a point where we have to take action. That's why it's being reflected as a corporate risk for those individual schools. In a lot of cases, these are schools who said previously there's absolutely nothing that we're able to do. But with the work that they've put in, with some of the discussions they've had, with some of the support that we've been able to put in place, we have seen a shift. So again, I mentioned when we look at our 3-year projections, a reduction of those deficits by 55%. Between when we first had the first versions in June versus where we are at the third versions today. That's a significant decrease. In terms of what that means at an individual school level, yeah, it is absolutely challenging, and there are lots of difficulties. And that's not a case of you've done this, the problem goes away. No, there are lots of problems that are going to continue. And those discussions around the need for equitable funding across the board become even more important as things move forward. But the best position for us to be in to have those conversations nationally is to make sure that we have some consistency across all of our schools. So that's the nature of the discussion. I think the pressure isn't also just on the individual schools. The pressure is also on officers within the council and within other areas of the council, because other areas of the council need to adapt in terms of the services that they provide, in terms of the funding that they receive, and those sorts of things as well. So the conversations are really difficult. We are really mindful of the impact. We're trying to have conversations around what are we able to do? Where do you need support? We can't take decisions for schools in terms of their operational management. Schools are responsible and required to do that through delegated funding, and they're also best placed to do that. But it isn't a case of picking on individual schools and just trying to be difficult. This is around sustainability for all of our 25,000 kids that we have in primary and secondary and special education in the Vale, and doing what we can within our control to the best of our ability, so that we're able to have some of those conversations more nationally about the bigger picture, which is funding overall.
If I could come back on that, you said that you'd so far found £750,000 savings from the 10 schools that were looked at. The overall deficit is 15 million. 750,000 is important and it's a large number, but it's not a larger number in relation to the deficit for this forecast for this financial year.
Sorry, Martin, that's my mistake. 750,000 via the work that the consultant has provided to schools. But overall, in terms of the 3-year projections, we're into the multi-millions of pounds. I can't give you an exact figure on that because, as I say, we've only had the details through very recently. We need to do some work around it. But that 750k is just through the efficiencies, changes in timetabling, use of staff, for example, in a small number of the schools that they've been into. So that's just a part of the picture.
Thank you, Martin and Trevor. Geraint Scott.
Yeah, I guess I can only echo what Martin said from the perspective of a governor, and I know the kind of stress levels on our teaching staff as well as our senior managers within school, and I do worry that we're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. We've already discussed agency fees for teaching staff. Well, if the level of stress is leading to staff going off, then that's only going to increase that cost. And I guess the question more than anything else is, we have these targeted schools, be they 10 or down to 7, but what work's then being done with the rest of the schools that are at deficit but are not at this level, to ensure that whatever transformation is kind of being done in these more significant losses is being transferred across. And I just hope that, certainly I'm aware of examples, I'm not talking about the Vale now and I'm not talking about now, but historically of where schools have tried everything they can to try and persuade older, more experienced, higher pay scale teachers to leave because they are really struggling with the budget figure. And I just want to know what safeguards are in place to ensure that that doesn't take place.
I'm guessing that's me again. So the point Geraint raised is really, really important in terms of how is this learning being transferred to some of our other schools, because as we said previously, lots of our schools find themselves in really difficult positions. And again, it's short-term, medium-term, long-term. So some of the short-term stuff, the easy wins that we're doing around infrastructure procurement, all that kind of stuff, that's being done now. So schools are starting to see those results. The more medium term, the stuff around the school improvement and partnership board, the work that we're doing with the EEF, those sorts of things around how do you change practice in schools to try and address some of the challenges that we have coming through. That's the stuff that takes a little bit longer, and that's where there's a lot of school-to-school work happening at the same time in terms of how that information is being transferred across. Some of the work that we're doing with the Business Managers Network has been incredibly useful. Again, you often only have, well, the vast majority of the time, you only have one business manager in a school, if that. So they're having to recreate the wheel and bringing them together and having those discussions. There are hundreds of thousands of pounds of efficiency savings just on the types of software that we use within a school. So we did a change to a different system for managing pupil information. It was really challenging to get that across, but thanks to the grit of our schools, we did cross the line on that. It's been really successful, and there's a few £100,000 of savings for exactly the same functionality, and schools are able to support themselves and through the work that we have at the local authority in doing some of those things. We are changing the nature of how we communicate with some of our schools. So again, how do we capitalize on capacity and create capacity in our schools and make sure that the engagement that we have with them, we're actually able to do some of these things. So instead of having more virtual calls like this to provide updates of information, we've changed our comms channels with the introduction of Connected. And when we do meet with our primary, secondary heads or special heads together or as a sector, those are workshop focused going forward. So, you know, looking at the issue, how are we going to solve it and get together and work the problem together, and that learning that a lot of schools have been able to deliver is able to be transferred, as opposed to creating sort of an artificial network, which is less effective. But a big part of the work that we're able to do at the local authority is to make sure, what have we learned? What have the schools learned? What have they been able to do differently? And how do we transfer that across to the schools who are coming down the line and facing exactly the same challenges? So again, I think I gave some examples previously of, you know, we've set up some workshops between individual schools for some of the interventions they've been put in place, or some of the new teaching models they've put in place. One of the schools that's done that has worked with, who's successfully done that in the past, has worked with, actually two schools who've done that in the past, have worked with one of our schools who've been identified in those 7 we mentioned previously, and based on the information I've seen today, that school is well placed to recover their in-year deficit over the next few years. So that shows me that kind of learning and those opportunities do make a difference and can have an impact.
Thanks very much. Over to you, Claire Werrett.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everybody for your presentations, really. I totally echo what Martin said and Geraint said. I'm sitting here just worrying about head teachers, and I completely understand the situation the Vale finds themselves in and the wider situation across Wales. But I have to think about what I see working with head teachers and how much pressure they're under. Obviously, there are schools that are in really, very difficult situations. And I know that Trevor mentioned these sort of outliers, and presumably they've got there over a number of years, and I'm sure work would have been done with them in the run up to this position that they find themselves in. But what I see when I go into schools, and what I know from my own experience, is that head teachers, particularly primary head teachers, have to do so many different jobs. They are cutting staff and doing the job themselves. So I go in and I see head teachers who are caretakers, who have their hands down drains, who are one-to-ones with children, who have to be taken out of class, even though we are mindful of the fact of inclusion, and we want to avoid opportunities where children are taken out of class. But where there is a teacher in one class with 30 children and there is a child that is causing difficulties due to their needs and maybe is lashing out, that child has to be removed from the class. There's no choice. We have to be practical and realistic about this. So who does that child go to? In my experience, often it's the head that will say, there's nobody else that can have them. I will have them. So they are managing their school. They are caretaking. They are lunchtime supervising. They are covering breaks. They are looking after staff who are really feeling the pressure of all of this, and the fact that perhaps they haven't got enough support in their classes because the budget won't allow it. They are doing all the jobs they need to do as a school manager, plus several other jobs. And then they have this massive problem of managing a school budget where a lot of that is not their fault because there is not enough funding. And we're all aware of that. I'm not saying for one moment there aren't some heads who really need to learn more about managing their budgets. But I am very concerned about the well-being of our school leaders, and I'd like to know what are we doing about their well-being. Not many people I know want to be a head anymore, and I always thought it was the best job in the world. But I see people who are saying, I don't want to be a head. I just don't want to be. I can't go there. You know, we do have school leaders and leaving. Not saying particularly in the Vale of Glamorgan, but I know several heads who've just said, I can't do it, I've got to go. So experienced heads that have had really good careers and have worked hard, are just saying, I can't do it anymore, I can't. So what are we doing for the sustainability of our school leaders? How are we building capacity? And most importantly of all, what are we doing to make sure that they are looked after, because they are looking after everybody else? So I'd appreciate perhaps some sort of input on what the council are doing to look after our school leaders, and that understanding that actually they find themselves in untenable positions. Thank you.
Those are all really valid points. We're all concerned about the impact of our head teachers. There's no question the significant impact that it's had on those individuals. There's also no question of the work that our schools are trying to do to make this to make things feasible, and that the priority number one is our kids. There's never any doubt in that. You mentioned about some of the realities of some of the decisions that are having to be taken at school. I suppose part of the answer to that is the realities of what we're having to do at local authority level as well, because the option of continuing to overspend puts the council at essence at risk, and that's only going to make things worse. You mentioned about the need to create capacity, and again, that's absolutely vital. And again, we've spoken and provided some examples of where we're trying to do that, to try and remove some of the bureaucracy or some of the other challenges so that schools can focus on teaching and learning, or to try and reduce some of the mechanics around managing the budget, or trying to upskill staff. These are some of the systemic things that we're looking to do. Equally, I know governing bodies and chairs of governors, who are looking after the welfare of their heads as well, are trying to do loads to look after them. We haven't got an easy solution, because what we're not able to do is make the problem go away. But equally, and the message we continually give to schools, and it's really, really important. There's never an expectation that one school on its own is going to solve its problems. This is a collective problem. It's as much our problem in the local authority as it is the schools, as it is a cluster, as it is a nation when we're talking about education. That's one thing that we need to do in terms of looking after each other. Also, a lot of the engagement that we need from heads, and making sure they're able to engage with some of the programs we talked about, the ones that are outlined in the report and elsewhere, so that there are opportunities to speak to other heads, to speak to us face to face, and to have some of the conversations and talk through the problems. Those are things that we can control and that we're trying to control. But the challenge is we aren't able to make the issue, the inherent issue itself, go away. The best we can do is to work with them and try and work the problems and create some of that capacity. Again, the reality is that capacity isn't going to be introduced overnight. None of these things really are going to be introduced overnight, so we've got to work through it. We know about the challenges in terms of recruitment within education at all levels across education, and it is a really difficult situation to be working in at the moment. When you compound that with the increase in complexity and needs, with things like the budget, with all of the other pressures that we face, changes to the curriculum, changes in legislation, changes in our requirements, there's no shortage of things that we're having to do. But I suppose the one message, and I understand the perspective from heads, it certainly might not feel this way sometimes, but they aren't in it alone. It is a shared problem. We all have a different perspective in terms of how we work the problem and what we're required to do in addressing some of the problems, but not for one instance would we ever suggest it's down to a school in isolation. When a school rings us up and says we have an issue with a capital element of their building, or their toilets are blocked up, or their cleaners aren't doing what they need them to do, or something along those lines. I wish we had an army of people that we could send out to solve the problem. We've got about 2. But those 2 staff are, they might as well wear capes when they go out to try and help the schools as best as we possibly can to try and overcome those, taking what we've learned back to the local authority and trying to change our own practice to avoid those sorts of challenges in the future and remove some of those distractions that the heads are feeling. So I wish I had a really good answer to that in terms of something that we can do today that would make the pain go away. I'm really sorry that I don't.
No.
But again, it's that one message. They aren't in it alone. It is our problem. It is really difficult. There are really difficult conversations, really unpalatable choices. That's the reality that we're in. But between what we can do as officers in the local authority, what governors can do, what the church can do, what other staff can do, what parents can do, what communities can do, everybody needs to come together and play their role and try and help, I suppose.
Thank you. It's good to hear your understanding, and I don't for one moment think, dispute the realities that you find yourself in as a local authority. It's just for me wanting to emphasise what I can see in our heads. And, obviously the children are at the centre of everything we do, and head teachers, they want the very best for the children, but broken head teachers and broken school leaders are never good for the children. And I think the observation is that, heads do feel alone. So it's great to hear you say, Trev, you want to reassure heads that they are not alone, because the buck does stop with them, and it's with every aspect of school life. You mentioned parents, it's parents, and actually parenting the parents these days, in some cases, heads are carrying it all, and they're not getting the rest they need. They're not getting, the time. They're working such long hours, and they're carrying this weight of worry. So it is very important that we realise this and we're really mindful of it. I know, we can't solve the problem. It's really difficult. But it's being mindful of that. Otherwise, I think, it's untenable for some of our school leaders, and they do feel alone and they do feel isolated because it rests with them ultimately. So it's great as well that we have some really good governing bodies, because a good governing body is worth their weight in gold, and they can support and challenge when necessary, isn't it, that head teacher? But to know that you have an understanding of that and that they'll have their eye on the head teachers is something that, I consider to be extremely important. So thank you so much for answering the question. But I totally understand. Thank you.
Sorry about that, everyone. Thank you, Claire. Over to Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. I put my hand up, obviously, because finances and budget reports are come under my portfolio. I think it's difficult for our staff to say that the level of pressure that they are also under. They've been working on budgets now since early summer, and it might be. I don't know what the reality is in terms of whether we can write off deficits, but we can't walk away from them, and councils cannot return a deficit budget. I've talked to many of the leaders, some of whom have had to declare a Section 114 notice and the implications of that for public services going forward, where anything that isn't purely statutory is out of the question. And we know, as is being put in finance reports to this council, that if we don't manage to get a handle on this actually could have very, very dramatic impacts on the council. We are a low council tax council, but we don't want to put excess burden on people. And to be fair, since 2012, our funding for education has been above IBA every year. We've never been a council that's top sliced education budgets. We've always tried to be as supportive as we can. And as the education spokesperson for the Welsh Local Government Association, in October of last year, I actually wrote to the Cabinet Secretary with a report by the WLGA on the state of education in Wales. And we were talking about what the situation is across Wales. And if we look at the primary sector, over 350 out of 1,195 schools are forecast to be in deficit, with total deficits exceeding 47 million in Wales. In the secondary sector, 84 schools out of 174 are forecast to be in deficit, with total deficits over 50 million. The most significant concerns were where the average deficit per school is high, and with some secondary schools with average deficits over £400,000. This is an issue. There are, we're looking at provision or the costs of provision of additional learning needs and early years provision. And so there is an area of financial fragility. But what I would say, this is the first year that we haven't had to eke out an austerity confined budget into purely statutory or focusing on purely statutory provision. So, if we can move forward on that, but what I would say is that we are coming at this from a perspective of collaboration. I was with the school budget forum not that long ago, and we know exactly what schools are facing, and we will work with them. That's why we brought in specialists in education finance, and that's been working to a certain degree. And all I can say is that the more that we work together, the more we will work towards a solution to this and to providing the level of education that we want for all our children. But at the moment, it's very, very difficult to go to Welsh Government and make a case when there is such disparity between some of our schools. And we also need to get a handle on that as well. So there are plenty, and I'm sure that as we go through budget setting, we'll be having this discussion a lot more. But what I can say is the officers of this council and this council as a whole really want to support our schools, and we'll work with them to find solutions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Councillor Burnett. Can't see any other hands up at the moment, but I've got a couple of questions. I know Trevor's been overworked, but I've got a couple of questions for you or for anyone else. There's been a lot of talk tonight about governance and putting structures in place. But we know in the letter sent on Friday, it says a minority of schools, so 19%, accounted for the majority of the overall projected school deficit position, about 65%. So how was that allowed to happen in the first place? And how can we be sure that this won't happen again?
The majority of those deficits came into being quite quickly. So that's the first thing. These aren't for the vast majority of them. They aren't historical deficits that have been creeping up year on year. They have come through quite quickly, and they have, in some cases, doubled in size within the year. So again, this isn't a piece of work that just started in September or that started in June. The work that we've been going with these schools has been for quite some time now. But the reality is it hasn't yielded any of the changes that have been required to make the difference, hence the need for escalation.
Thank you for that, Trevor. You mentioned different delivery models of the curriculum. Some will require more staff, some will require fewer staff. I think it's fair to say that in the current situation, there won't be many curriculum models where schools are employing more staff. So have any projections been made about redundancies or staff being let go across the Vale as a result of these cost-cutting measures?
I don't have any projections because the staffing decisions for schools are down to the schools themselves and the governing body. So it will depend, as I said, on the individual school circumstances and how they're able to mitigate or deliver the curriculum that they've chosen to deliver within the resources that they have. So we don't have an overall projection of what the case is. What I would suggest, though, is if you have a look at the WLGA State of Education in Wales, there are some overall projections in terms of as a sector, what that might look like overall when you take everything into account. So it might be worth having a look at that. But some schools, again, it's through natural attrition. Some schools, they're changing their delivery models. Some schools are more reliant on some of the expert support for inclusion. But again, you know, these changes will take time to bed in to see some of the differences that are needed. But in terms of an overall figure or a target, we don't set targets for schools in terms of the amount of staff that they need to have, because those are local decisions that they need to consider within their own context.
Okay. And then finally, Claire touched on staff well-being. I mean, in many ways, it feels like schools in the Vale are at crisis point. Is there any worry about how this impacts recruitment and retention on a broader scale? I mean, as Claire said, you know, head teachers are working incredibly hard, and this is a really difficult place for them to be in. So, has any thought been given to kind of how this impacts recruitment and retention in the months and years ahead?
Yeah, I think the honest answer is it makes it far more difficult. Nobody's going to pretend that it isn't. People don't get into working in schools in whatever capacity that may be, you know, because they want to become accountants or they want to deal with budgets. They do it because they love to look after kids and they're genuinely worried about future generations. And that's part of the reason that our head teachers feel so conflicted, because this isn't a job, this is a life. This is a calling that they've chosen to deliver, and it's the same for many of my colleagues within the local authority. It's the same with many colleagues across the council as a whole, in terms of folks getting involved with public service. But that makes us feel the pain a lot more deeply. I don't have figures in front of me in terms of what this might look like for getting people into the sector, but I know from some of the conversations I've had with colleagues across schools, it is really difficult, especially as things become more specialised. It's really difficult to find somebody for any school. It's even more difficult to find somebody in the specialist sector. It's even more difficult to find somebody in the Welsh medium sector. It's even more difficult when you try and get a specialist for ALN in the Welsh medium sector within primary or secondary. Those problems aren't going away. So it's difficult to have an endpoint in terms of whether it's going to become easier to recruit going forward, because the honest answer is it is really hard. I suppose one thing that is encouraging is, you know, there are a number of adverts that have been out there for head teachers, and the quality and caliber of some of the folks we've had through, it's still really good. So it's not like we're disadvantaging our kids at the moment, but certainly it is going to be a challenge going forward, make no bones about it.
Okay, thank you for that, Trevor. Can't see any of the other hands up at the moment. It's been a long agenda item, and thank you everyone for your contributions on this. No more hands up, so I'll, in that case, move that the current position of school balances be noted, and that the findings from the Audit Wales review be noted as well, and also that comments made on this agenda item be referred to the Cabinet, and also that we have a financial update at the next committee meeting in March as well. If I'd be able to get a seconder for that. Councillor Payne, thank you very much. Thanks once again to everyone for your contributions, especially Trevor. You've had you've had a lot of contributions this evening, so thank you, and it's much appreciated as ever, all your hard work. Okay, moving on to agenda item 6, annual report for SACRA SAC 24-25. Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. Have you selected request to speak? There we are. Thank you.
Sorry, I was talking away there. Nobody could hear me. Sorry about that, everybody. Good evening, everybody. I will try to keep this brief because I'm aware that this last agenda item took some time. I'm also aware that a number of scrutiny committee members are actually involved in SACRA and SAC, so you will know a great deal more about the activities contained in this report than I would. So in summary, the annual report is provided to the committee for information. It summarises activities of SACRA, Standing Advisory Council for Religious Education, and SAC, the Standing Advisory Council, as detailed in the draft report for the year 24-25, which is found at Appendix 1. Copies of the annual report will be published on the Vale of Glamorgan's website and sent to all schools within the authority. The National Library and other individuals and institutions will also be contacted. The report, for the first time, includes a message from the chair of SACRA, which provides an interesting overview of the actions contained within it. The report also references key issues raised during the year, including discussions around changes to and take-up of religious education, religious studies, and religion, values and ethics qualifications. It also references the new daily act of collective worship and school visits guidance for schools, which is now available on the Vale website. Reviews of Eston inspections in the Vale of Glamorgan schools are also contained. The report highlights ongoing concerns surrounding the challenge in falling numbers at GCSE and A-level results for religious studies, and SAC intends to continue to work with schools to support increased engagement on this. For your information, briefing papers for meetings are emailed out to all teaching staff signed up to the SAC mailing list after meetings. These also provide a plethora of resources for teaching staff. Minutes are also uploaded onto the Vale of Glamorgan website for everyone to access. Membership has increased during the reporting year and new teacher members have joined, as well as some new religious representatives. However, active recruitment continues in order to fill existing vacancies. This is a brief summary of the report, which is presented for your information. I could take any additional questions if anyone has them, but also I would remind all members that Fran Wright, the clerk to SACRA, is also available should anybody require any more detailed information. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Over to members of the committee, if there are any questions. I've got a question. I think it'd be interesting. The report references the sharing of good practice across schools in this area. If there were any examples that could be shared with the committee to improve understanding of what's going on with RVE education.
There are some examples in the report, and the chair references some positive impacts during the reporting year. I'm not aware of any specific examples of work, but I would say that there are an awful lot of links to work contained in the report, which members may well find interesting.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. I can't see any other hands up at the moment. So if no one's got any other thoughts or questions, so having, excuse me. So committee having considered the annual report, I move that we approve, note and approve the report. If I could have a seconder for that. Thank you very much, Councillor Haynes. Much appreciated. Thanks very much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 7, final agenda item of the evening. Task and finish review group membership. Gareth's going to take us through this one.
Yes, Chair, I'm honoured. Thank you. Just very briefly, Chair, members will know that the ALN review is ongoing. It's not been as quick as once envisaged, Chair. It's outside the 12 weeks time scale, unfortunately, but we are coming to a close, and we should be completed within the next few weeks. So I just thought it was pertinent to bring a report, Chair, so we can look at the membership of the next review into the impact of tough budget decisions, Chair. So I'm just looking for members to volunteer to come on that task and finish review group, which will commence towards the end of February, early March, Chair, and then we can crack on with looking at school budgets and the impact that has had, Chair. So it's over to committee and looking for volunteers, please.
That's great. Well, got some hands up already. Kathy?
Yeah, I'd be keen to be on that task and finish group.
Thanks, Kathy. Helen Payne.
Yeah, I'd be interested in being on that task and finish too, Chair.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
Councillor Haynes. And Councillor Gilligan.
Sorry, Chair, I had my camera off. Yes, I would be happy to do that task and finish group.
Thank you, Steve. Wendy?
Ditto, I'd be happy to be on the budget task and finish as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin Price.
So would I. Like to be there. If you feel it's appropriate, if the committee feels it's appropriate.
Councillor Asbury.
Myself as well, please.
Thank you, Anne. Go back to Gareth. How does that feel to you?
That's great, Chair. Yeah, I think it's we've got members from all political groups there, Chair, and we've got some 2 cooperative members, which will bring a different perspective, Chair. So that looks a really good group, Chair. So I'm happy to formulate the group with that membership, Chair. So thank you to the committee for that. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gareth. There we go. We've decided the group. I guess I'll move that we note the report and the membership of the group, if there could be a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for that. That's our final agenda item. Thank you, everyone, for your participation tonight. And our next meeting is slated for the 16th of March. So thank you, everyone. Nostar.